if we can send the strongest of messages that Ukraine being around the table, together with Europe, discussing what peace will look like, and peace is something that we need to discuss and what it means, and we cannot decide for Ukraine what peace means, is that unity we can keep and that strength of resolve as we enter a new phase of discussing with the new United States administration. So if that tweet was a launchpad for, let's say, a new course of how we discuss, then let's discuss. But nothing, again, about Ukraine without Ukraine, because otherwise we will not be doing either the European Union a favor, Ukraine a favor, and certainly neither the United States.
Minister Sudenko, we talk about Ukraine, and obviously there were some outside Ukraine who were surprised or intrigued to see the apparent support for a Trump victory in November, which was born out of a frustration with the European response to the support for Ukraine. So could you speak to how the economy is faring and what people are expecting of this new administration and the path in the next 6 to 12 months?
So I would say that because of the support from our partners and because of the resilience of Ukrainian business after the dramatic fall of our economy in 2022, we remember it perfectly well, 30% GDP fall. In 2023, we grew up by 5%. Last year, it's 3.6%. And this year, we expect growth as well. And if we would compare our economy with the Russian economy, so our economy is in a better shape. But it does not mean that we can stop. So we need to strengthen sanction policy. I absolutely agree with you. And I think that when the, let's say, peace discussions will take place, we should be as stronger as possible, and Russia should be as weaker as possible as well. Otherwise, there won't be a fair discussion or fair negotiations. I think there is a big expectation from population and from business side that this year will end the active phase of war. But what is more important, and I want to emphasize on this, there is like our result. It's not just peace itself, but it should be sustainable peace, and it should be guarantees, and we should be absolutely sure, together with Europe, that that potential possible settlement will prevail Putin and will prevail him to restart and to invade again. That's why I think that we should be focused on guarantees during this stage, on strengthening of our economy, and of course sanctions, because, and also I had a discussion with business here in Davos, and I told them very openly that those companies that are still working in Russia need to exit from Russian market, because actually it has not less effect than sanction policy itself.
Rady Sikorski, we've had a clear shift in Washington, and everyone's trying to work out what it means. There has been a shift in recent months in the balance of fighting on the battlefield. What we've heard here is very similar, with respect to the panelists, very similar things to what we've heard in the past from different parts of the European leadership. Does there need to be a shift coming from Europe in response to Donald Trump, but also in response to the situation on the ground?
I think in Europe we are doing the right thing. As the Minister said, the loan on the basis of frozen Russian assets and other types of assistance that we're giving to Ukraine should suffice for this year. There's been a spike in deliveries to Ukraine. Ukraine has the means to resist for this year, which Putin should take into account. Poland is doing what is our duty. We're the presidency of the EU right now. We hope to open one negotiating cluster to do with rule of law, and hopefully another one to do with Europe's external policy. And remember that security guarantees for one another in the European treaties are much more specific, actually, than in the NATO treaty.
Just to follow up on that, Minister Barrot, President Zelensky talked about 200,000 peacekeepers this week here in Davos. Do you think that's about right? Where are they going to come from?
Well, my view is that the 21st century probably started on February 24th of 2022. With the end of the era of the peace dividends, people have to get used to the idea that we're going to permanently need to spend more and to do better in terms of protecting our own security. And the first rendezvous, the first moment when this question is going to be asked is the enforcement of any peace agreement that will be struck, that will need to be consented by the Ukrainians, because there cannot be any just and durable peace that would imply a capitulation by the Ukrainians, but that will be guaranteed one way or another by international partners, and including, of course, European countries. These are discussions that we've been having internally in dedicated forums in order to try and start thinking about what such security guarantees might look like. But more generally, what I think the public should realize is that we're not going back to the pre-February 24 era, and that we're going to start doing much more to ensure the security in our neighborhood.
But just on that specific, when are the budgets going to reflect that? Because if you can understand why President Zelensky would say, look, the US is the only one that has to be a fundamental part of these forces, because we don't see European governments seriously recognising the things that you've just talked, this 21st century that you've recognised. Several governments haven't even been able to pass a budget, let alone start seriously increasing their defence spending. So do you understand why people just think it's not credible to be saying what you're saying?
I think that Europe has clearly said that it had realised this when in the strategic agenda that our leaders adopted last June, when President von der Leyen gave her speech in front of the Parliament, there was a clear analysis of the fact that we need to do more. But once we realize that, we need to act, and we need to find a way to fund such extra efforts in terms of security and defense. This might mean some reshuffling of our priorities at the European level, and security is for any continent and any country priority number one. It also means activating or leveraging the ability of the European Union to finance such a build-up in security and defense. There have been proposals of activating once again the financing lever of the European Union to build up our ability to defend ourselves. President Macron has proposed a doubling of the European budget to reflect the new priorities, and security is one of them. Adaptation to climate change is another one of them. But clearly, we'll have to think hard about how we fund this new ambition that we have to have for our own security.
Well, there's thinking hard, but there's ideas from President Macron, but none of which have been accepted by some key other players around the table. Roberta?
I think you are right in saying we have a big mismatch between what citizens fear most, and this shows the way they vote, whether they vote or not in election results, and what elected representatives tend to deliver. It has become more popular in national parliaments today to say, you know what, we cannot spend this much on defense as is being asked for us because we need to spend it on infrastructure. But that mismatch comes with the fact that our citizens at the same time tell us, but we need to feel safe. And it is not only citizens, people in countries that are bordering Ukraine. It is also in countries that are further and that would, under any normal circumstances, exonerate themselves from responsibility. So how are we going to bridge that and understand the frustration? Essentially, what I felt also from President Zelensky this week was frustration. Like, how many times am I going to come here? You're going to tell me we stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, and then I go away with either delayed implementation. Yes, some countries help me more than others, but some countries say they're going to help me and then they don't. So on a European level, we have, because we have the mandate, because security is at the top of our priorities, we have the possibility to do more. And let's not forget, 3 years ago, I would not have thought Finland and Sweden would be NATO members. 3 years ago, I would not have thought that you'd have more national parliaments than I ever expected discussing potential reinstatement of obligatory military service. This is, you know, a continent that has seen tyranny but over a generation ago. Let's not forget that. So I think it's, you know, we talk about the next months, year as being crucial, as being an eye-opener, but we cannot divest security from what it means to live in Europe. We cannot divest feeling safe and our citizens actually being, let's say, content with what their governments are doing if they feel that there's a danger that is close by. And again, I go back to what I said in the first time I spoke, is that it is in no one's interest for us to see capitulation. Not in Ukraine's, not in the EU, and not in the United States. We talk a lot about spending. How much have we spent? How much more do we need to spend? If you compare $175 billion for the United States, 136 billion euros for the EU, the expenditure was done. The contribution was done. We just were sometimes too slow, sometimes not coherent, sometimes not agile enough. But if there's anything that we've learned is that if we don't do that, then we will be squeezed out from the table, both politically and militarily. And I don't think that we can afford.
Minister Sabir, I'm just wondering, listening to this, and obviously we also heard your Zelensky's comments this week, the frustration that we've also heard reflected here. What are you coming away from Davos feeling? Do you feel that he's right in a sense to say, look, the US is the only we don't know how President Trump's going to behave, but at least we know the US has a serious response and is a serious power here?
You see, we value all the assistance, all the aid from our allies. European and Ukrainian security is indivisible. That's important to understand. And also I would like to point out one very important issue. Ukraine is not losing. In February, we will mark 3 years of this brutal Russian aggression. Probably a few people believe that Ukraine could prevail 3 years ago. Yes, maybe at that stage we should expect more decisive decisions. And probably we should not be in such a situation in which we are now. Yes, we are not in the strongest position now. That's true. That's why it is so important to fulfill this concept, peace through strength. And we have clear understanding of this concept and of the elements of this concept which could strengthen our positions right now. The outcome, from my humble opinion, the outcome of this war will shape a new global security order. And this will be a very unstable and dangerous world if Russia is rewarded for its aggression. It is inappropriate to put aggressor Russia on one dimension with Ukraine, which fighting for its independence. So on the contrary, if this war ends in a just way, with respect for Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity, and security, the world will be safer. That's why it is also very important not to manipulate with the meaning of the term peace. Just, comprehensive, long-lasting peace.
President Rinkevich, I'm interested in your response to that and the defense that Ukraine is not losing, but there's a very strong feeling that it's not winning, and as was admitted, it's certainly in a weaker position than it was.
Yes, and I think that then we need to come back a little bit to the history. Let's remember that we started quite well at the beginning of the war. Sanctions, military support, but then somehow we went to self-imposed red lines. We were talking a lot about the strategy. The current strategy that I'm hearing from time to time is we are going to support and we will support Ukraine as long as it takes. At the same time, we actually had to look at the strategy for Ukraine winning. Now we are in a situation where we are discussing the just peace. And here I very much agree with the Foreign Minister of Ukraine when he talks that now the meaning is that long and just peace means Ukraine being strong, because let's face it, I can't imagine, with all the history with Russia violating all the international agreements from Budapest Memorandum onwards, that if Ukraine is left without strong military support, without strong security guarantees, like it or not, but the only real security guarantee is NATO membership. We are divided in NATO, we have different opinions. I don't know how we are going to discuss this issue in the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague, but I see that we still have many NATO members that are very doubtful, and I don't see very good way forward, at least for the time being. So from that point of view, that's a kind of pessimistic point of view. The optimistic, well, this is the third year when Ukraine is fighting, and it keeps fighting. And with all the support, it will be strong. So if we continue pressing Russia, if we continue supporting Ukraine, then most probably we will be coming to some kind of agreement we can support. But then there is a next question, how we can contain Russia afterwards. And we can contain Russia afterwards only through strong Ukraine, militarily, economically, part of the European Union definitely, and second, yes, through not lifting sanctions or economic pressure on Russia after that deal is there. But I think we are now, and I myself, I was cautioning to run ahead of time, but we still need to also get a new strategy in place for us as well.
But the US has to be central to but Radek Sikorski, You know, one thing that from the first administration, Trump administration, from everything we've seen so far, the sort of the most optimistic approach comes from accepting he likes to do deals and he likes to announce peace, and many people have said he wants peace. The downside is perhaps that if he does a deal, he's going to want to lift sanctions, he's going to want to potentially remove all pressure from President Putin and Russia, even though many in Europe would still think he posed a serious threat. So I just wondered...
Well, that's speculation. What has actually happened is that the President of the United States has issued an ultimatum to Putin. Make terms of ending this war or else. And as I read Putin, he has a tendency to overplay his hand. And this is a moment to come to a deal, or the United States, President Trump is hinting, will get tougher. We're in a better place than we were 48 hours ago. And let's also remember that when Russia loses a war, historically, in the past, every time, after the Crimean War, after the Russo-Japanese War, after being knocked out of World War I, after losing in Afghanistan, after losing the Cold War, there are always reforms. So Ukraine winning this is important not just for Ukraine and for the European security architecture, but also for Russia and its people.
But at the same time as Russia is being given the ultimatum, put under pressure potentially, we see a broadening and a very kind of clear broadening of Russia's antagonism against the West. Only yesterday we had the UK Defence Minister announcing the aggressive moves of the Russian ship in the Channel. We've had much discussion around the Baltic and the cables. So, you know, at the same time as this is happening, Putin is threatening Europe on a wider front and in potentially in a much more open way.
Well, of course. Putin is repeating the mistakes of Soviet leadership. The Soviet Union took on the West and lost. He himself is on the record saying that under Brezhnev, the Soviet Union overspent on the military and bankrupted the country. And he was very insistent that this mistake should not be repeated. And he's doing exactly that. Russia has taken on all of Europe, has antagonized countries that were previously friendly or neutral, Nordic countries, the place where the Russians were keeping their money, the UK. Hybrid war doesn't mean just being a nuisance on the internet. Hybrid war means cyber attacks, means arsons, means assassinations, means hostile actions in the Baltic Sea, in the English Channel, and so on. We have it all the time. And we need to take action. I've closed down a Russian consulate in Poland. We've reduced the area where Russian diplomats may travel to make it more difficult for them to service their agents. Our security services have agreed that the Russians who are trying to destroy the European Union should not benefit from the privileges of the Schengen area. So when you have a Russian diplomat in one EU country, they should be able to travel only in that EU country and not all over Europe, servicing agents perhaps in another country. These are very practical things that we can do to limit their capacity to do damage.
Minister Barrot, I just want to follow up on what I was saying about the Russia and what Minister Sikorski has just said. That is part of this effort to build European public support for this war, but also the broader effort it involves. Speaking more about the many-layered aggression that we're now seeing from Russia, for the grey war, if you like.
Yes, indeed. And I agree with everything Radek just said. And if I referred earlier on with a perhaps provocative comment on the beginning of the 21st century, this is precisely because despite of all that happened, including in Ukraine with Russia, something radical happened on February of 2022. It is a fundamental mutation of the threat, a threat that has morphed into a full-scale invasion, with then Vladimir Putin internationalizing this war into Asia, and then weaponizing information, weaponizing migration against Poland, weaponizing energy prices, like he's been doing against Moldova and other countries in Europe, meaning that the threat has crossed a new threshold that requests from our end a new posture in terms of security for our continent. And this needs to be very clearly explained, because there is no going back to earlier years when the threat did not cross such a threshold. And this needs to be understood in Europe, but this also needs to be understood in the US. And I agree with what Radek said. Recent comments by representatives of the incoming administration tend to suggest that there is an understanding now in Washington that there is no possible bad deal for Ukraine that would at the same time be a good deal for Europe and the US.
Just to supplement what I said, because the confrontation with Russia has already melted the main, but it also goes beyond our continent. As we speak, there is an air bridge of Russian equipment from Syria to their bases in Libya. In Africa, Russia is engaging in a classic colonial exercise of sending mercenaries and soldiers and using despoiled African raw materials and wealth to extend Russia's influence in Africa. The southern tier of the European Union is, of course, affected by this. We should not permit Russia to capture permanently bases in Africa and to be able to do what they do on the Polish-Belarusian border, which is to switch on and off huge migration flows so as to try to enable politically the far right in the European Union, so as to destroy the European Union through the political process, because that's the objective.
Okay, we have a few minutes for questions, and I know that there will be lots. Just if you could keep them brief, and I'll be looking for the rising intonation at the end of a sentence that involves a question. Okay, here first.
John Chipman, Executive Chairman of the IISS. I wanted, with a rising question, to provide in 3 sentences the legal justification for seizing Russian state assets. And it is, and we've produced a 30-page paper with lawyers from 9 different countries that supports this. It is basically this, that there is total agreement that Russia's invasion of Ukraine was illegal. When there is a peremptory breach of international law, it is open to states holding assets of that state to seize them in order to help the invader to comply with his legal obligation to pay reparations to the invaded state. This is not something without precedent. When, after Iraq invaded Kuwait, Iraqi assets were seized to support Kuwait, not a poor country, in order to be able to repair the damages on the oil terminals that were destroyed by Saddam Hussein. So my rising intonation question is, could the European Union not agree that the French, the Germans, and others in Europe could offer this? Because Mr. Trump's next tweet could be, I will not use American money to support Ukraine, I will use Russian money.
So a very quick response.
Well, I support it. I know that some colleagues are concerned about the effect that this would have on the euro currency. But I think a slight devaluation of the euro would be good for various economies.